Hi, welcome to the third part of the course. In this section, we'll talk about distortion, the image deformation caused by the optical characteristics of the lens. Let's start with a simple but very illustrative example. Let's load the shot. We can immediately load the cache. Let's take a look at it. What's interesting about this shot? First of all, it contains many objects with clearly straight lines. The sign on the building, the vertical lines of the facade, the corners of the windows. We know these lines are straight, but in the footage, they appear heavily bent. And that distortion is caused by the lens. This is a typical manifestation of lens distortion. The camera, especially one with a wide lens, bends the image. The wider the field of view, the more pronounced the distortion. And in this case, it's already close to extreme. So, why do we need to correct such distortion at all? Let's say we want to replace the sign on the building. It's not enough to simply track the motion. If we place a new rectangular image over the sign, it won't fit properly, because it won't follow the bend introduced by the lens. The rectangle needs to be distorted exactly the same way as the original was by the lens. The same applies to accurate camera solving. Until we remove the distortion, any 3D match will be inaccurate. So let's take a look at what we're dealing with in this shot. This shot was filmed using a Sony FD-RX 1000 camera, which I found listed on the WFX camera database. The sensor dimensions are given as 6.19 by 4.57 millimeters. Most likely, 6.19 millimeters is the horizontal size and 4.57 millimeters is the cropped vertical, possibly due to the aspect ratio used during recording. Let's set the horizontal size to 6.19 millimeters. That's a very small sensor. Typically, sensors in cameras are much larger depending on the model, but here it's just 6 millimeters horizontally, which confirms that this is indeed a tiny sensor. We specify that the horizontal value is known. We don't know the frame height. We also don't know the focal length it's not listed here. We'll adjust that a bit later. However, we do know for sure that the pixel aspect ratio is 1, as it is in most cases. Once we apply that, we get a sensor width of 3.48 millimeters, but the website lists the vertical as 4.57 millimeters, exactly 4.57 cropped down to 3.48. So this means the frame was cropped vertically, and this is approximately what the frame looked like, slightly cropped on the top and bottom. Once again, we've set the sensor size, specifically one side of the sensor. The focal length is still unknown. Everything else we'll try to figure out manually. The first step is to perform a standard 2D tracking. I'm opening the timeline panel so we can monitor which segments still need trackers and which ones already have enough coverage. Tracking here is very straightforward, so I think we won't focus on it too much unless something interesting comes up. We track it all the way to the end. Of course, you can try to track features as far as possible, especially when they stretch toward the edges of the frame. But here's a practical rule. The stronger the lens distortion, the less sense it makes to push your track all the way to the edge. Naturally, you shouldn't cut it off in the center without reason either. But trying to cling to the last pixels is often a losing battle. Even with good distortion grids, extreme wide-angle lenses still produce distortions near the corners that are difficult to calculate. In this case though, everything looks fine. The tracker appeared, so we continue. We're not placing all the trackers in a single spot. We are covering different edges of the frame. I'm checking where the image still looks good, and I stop the tracking there. I'm checking where the image still looks good, and I stop the tracking there. We can clearly see the perspective distortion of the pattern. Let's take another look. For example, by creating a tracker somewhere around here. Right now we can see how the white keyframe box gets distorted along with the wall. It tilts and shifts to the side in the same way. I really like this shot. I often use it as an example because it's both simple for tracking and very illustrative when it comes to understanding how lens distortion works. It's hard not to see what's going on here. We already have 6 trackers here. Let's move to the moment when one of them disappears and add a new one in roughly the same area of the frame. Let's try locking onto the sign. For example, This spot looks suitable. This spot isn't great for tracking. The point gets occluded by the sign. Let's stop the track at the moment. It becomes unreliable. Maybe here. And we keep adding. Let's start from the center. Let's track forward. And backward. It's clearly visible that the tracker performs better closer to the center of the frame. Distortions are minimal there. Take this black line for example. It's noticeably curved near the edges, but almost perfectly straight in the center. The image overall first bends one way, then the other. So it makes sense to continue tracking while keeping the pattern as close to the center as possible. Let's move on. This object right here. We stop the tracking, return to the center. We change the direction, open the tracker, and continue tracking. Done. I think it's worth tracking all 4 corners so we can later attach our sign to them. So we'll do the same thing 3 more times. And we go in the other direction. The screw head is curved in the opposite direction, and the software thinks it's moving too far. We won't be able to make it all the way to the end here. So now we already have several trackers. The red area shows where there are fewer than 4 trackers. Let's fill that in. We'll go from the end. That means it's the area where the camera won't be calculated accurately. One time I tried tracking that car in the image and the point ended up behind the camera. That was interesting. I won't spend time on that now, but if there are any curious minds out there, now you know. Well, looks like we've reached the minimum number of trackers we need. Let's check. Will the camera solve? No, it's still not good. And why do we think that is? First, we don't fully know the camera parameters. Second, maybe we don't have enough trackers yet. But I'm betting it's the camera that's to blame right now. Let's undo the result and go to the lens settings.